try it
All right.
again. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and just start this and say tonight we're
This
attacking
meeting is
Foulbrood.
being recorded.
If anybody starts joining us in the middle of this, I'm just going to go ahead and let them in. For the people who signed up and they're not joining, this is going to be on YouTube. I'm recording it now. So I guess I want to say welcome. I'm Julia. Thank you to Andy and Jenna for coming on here. We are going to talk about American Foulbrood tonight. And so Andy's going to start out, I guess, maybe giving us some technical background, and then Jenna can share her recent experience. And then I'm just hoping that everyone can leave this talk feeling more confident about spotting American Foulbrood and knowing what kind of supports exist. And then if we want to have, I asked for questions. I didn't get any beforehand, but if you do have questions, I've got the chat box open, or if you want to ask it after each person's presentation, I think there's plenty of time for us to do that. So I guess as we are all listening, I want to have you kind of think about what you might do if you suspected AFB in your own hives, and jot down a question. So I guess I want to turn over to Andy. Go ahead and you want to present your slideshow.
Sure. Sounds good. All right. Brood, which is a fungal disease. The list goes on. About the only common other bacterial disease that we worry about a lot commonly is European Foulbrood. And of course, I had a picture of that too, just to show you. There's a huge difference between the symptoms, the way they appear in the hive, and there's a huge difference in how serious of a concern they can be to the beekeeper as well. European Foulbrood used to be a background thing, and it in recent years has become something that we see very, very commonly. It's treatable, and sometimes it just can get better with as little as a brood break or a huge surge of nectar coming in and the hygienic behavior that's involved in that. American Foulbrood, however, very different story. They're both bacteria. They're related in name only. They're very, very different types of bacteria. So American Foulbrood, as we call it, AFB, is Pentabacillus larvae. It affects the brood, starts to break down when it's in the pupal stage. That's its biggest contrast to European Foulbrood. With European Foulbrood, you get discolored larvae, you get a spotty brood pattern. They kind of look like mandarin oranges. They get kind of twisted or slumped or kind of a melted appearance in that larval stage, the open brood. And you can differentiate that from American Foulbrood largely by the fact that American Foulbrood, you'll see your eggs, you'll see your open brood still looking fairly healthy, white, wet, shiny, kind of glossy, juicy looking larvae. And then they're already infected with it from a couple days old. But that larval stage still looks okay. It isn't until they become capped over for pupation where the brood breaks down. And so you get to that capping stage looking okay, and then under the capping is where the damage is occurring. And so that pupa that's inside the brood cell is dying and kind of rotting away, being eaten by the bacteria. And so the appearance of American Foulbrood, this is where I might share my screen and show you some pictures of it, is a spotty, kind of shoddy brood pattern. And those cappings tend to be sunken in because that's where the pupae is dying. The nurse bees will often pull the cells open, and it gives you kind of these kind of tears and perforations in your capping. So they're sunken in, kind of concave, right? Instead of normal convex, kind of domed out looking healthy brood. And the biggest test for it is that you can stick a dry twig or a matchstick into there, and that disgusting bacterial ooze of a pupa is gluey and gummy and kind of a caramel tan color. It's not watery. It's not white anymore. It doesn't really have a form to it anymore. It's just like goo or glue. There's a bad smell, kind of an organic, kind of nasty odor to American Foulbrood that's unique. Nothing else in the beehive smells anything like this. Once you smell it and you know how to identify it, then it's pretty clear what it is. Let me see if I can share my screen, even if I lose my audio. And
you can maybe use your chat if you want also.
By doing that,
Okay, fingers crossed. Let's see what happens here.
At least you'll be able to see some pictures. And then I'll flip
Yeah.
back if you can't hear me. There it goes. Chrome tab. It goes away as soon as I start sharing for some reason. All right. So
Okay, it says you've started screen sharing, but I don't see an image. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there's that, it's concave looking, and there's perforations or like places where so the nurse bees are taking those cappings off. Is that what you're saying? Like they're going to try to remove the pupa? Is that what they're doing? Okay. All right. So we saw,
all right, coming back. Can you hear me?
yep,
All right. Can you hear me now?
yeah.
All right. So in those pictures, I showed those perforated kind of sunken cappings, holes chewed into them. And then the final stage in those last two, there was one with a lighter yellow younger comb, and then that last one was it was an older comb, it's kind of a greasy black comb, with age comb darkens. And
Hmm.
so imagine that you're holding that comb, sun coming down over your shoulder, and it's lighting up the bottoms of the cells. And so in those pictures, the scale is it shows it kind of at the top in the picture, but that's kind of the way that you see it when you're looking at it with, say, the top bar towards your chest, and you're looking at that frame with the sun coming down and lighting up the bottoms of those cells and form like a crust, a scale of dried out crust. So it was a nice looking larvae, spun a cocoon, cell got capped over. Now you got a pupa. The bacteria is really taking over at this stage, and you lose that pupal form. It's being digested by the bacteria into that ropey, mucousy, gluey goo. And then eventually that dries into a scale, right? So we've gone from, from a pupa to snot to a crusty booger, basically, is what you've got. In that scale bottom of the cell is shiny and dark colored, almost black. And so that's what those later pictures were showing there, is that crust, that little tongue of a crusty scale in the bottom of the cell. And that's pretty definitive. If you see a scale or a frame of scales here and there with dead bird throughout, that's what it is. There's really nothing else in the world that looks like that. So that scale is why AFB is so threatening to beekeepers, right? Because European foulbrood, by contrast, you can treat that away, pretty much turn your back on it. If you have a hive that gets absolutely crushed by viruses, as that hive is out, there's really nothing much left in that comb that's going to reinfect a future hive of bees that you got on there. But American foulbrood get that scale, which contains millions and millions of bacterial spores. And those spores are viable through time, and they can last decades and decades and decades, years plus. And so they're in that comb. No antibiotic can touch them, and they stay dormant like a bacterial seed almost. That scale is. Those spores just sit there until, of course, there's a 2-day-old bee larva that's being fed by nurse bees and is exposed in that cell to that scale, and then boom, they germinate, and you've got sick new bees. So the foulbrood these days is largely used equipment, right? It's equipment that's been sitting around someone's barn for who knows how long, and then it gets sold at an auction or sold to a without inspection. And without, if you've never seen it before, you can't be expected to know what it looks like. It's very obvious once you've seen it, but up to that point, you don't know what you're looking at. And so that's correct. Basically, is used combs being sold to a beekeeper. You put a package of bees or install a new form you've got into them, split into them, and bang, now it's sick. It happened quick. And so AFB is kind of a fascinating one in that once it's in there, it's in there. Back in the day, it used to be very, very common. Nowadays, by contrast, it's really not. And so, as threatening as it is, likely, statistically, you could go your whole beekeeping life without ever seeing it, truly, right? And it takes care of caution. I'll talk about those things next. It's used equipment, it's cutouts, it's bees that have been living in some tree or the wall of an old farmhouse, and they die out and a new swarm moves in and re-inhabits and re-inhabits these old combs that have this issue still in, and then you get your hands onto them or your bees rob them out or whatever. That's the way we see them come. So a previous state apiarist here in Iowa, Glenn Stanley, right? Not me, not Bob Cox, who was before me, Gates. Glenn Stanley wrote articles in the American Bee Journal every now and then, and I was reading one of those from the early 80s about his work in the 70s. I'm from the 70s. We're going back a long way, sort of, right? But a lot has changed in those 4 or 5 decades, in that he said that there were counties in Iowa where he would come across American Foulbrood active infections in 40% of his inspection in those counties. Now imagine that. I see it probably on average about once, maybe twice a year. I've seen it 4 times this year. That's really exceptional. So I've seen the incident that maybe we'll talk about tonight. I've seen another one in Polk County. I saw one in at the SEBA auction in Dallas. Again, used equipment, right? So not an active infection, just combs that contain scale that were about to be sold. So we
In
stopped
these
that
situations,
from
are
being
you
passed
going
on
to
to an unknowing
inspect?
beekeeper.
Like in the situations that you
These are
found it?
inspections.
Okay. Okay, so this is like you
Yeah, I'm
going to
seeing
inspect.
these in inspection.
Okay. Sorry, Tanner.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, I'm the state apiarist. So when I'm talking about seeing it, I'm talking about seeing it during inspection work. Yeah, exactly that. So it's out there. It's very rare. We do. We open thousands and thousands of hives a year. I'm talking about seeing it a fraction of a percent. So that fraction of a percent is all fine as long as they're not your bees that have come down with it, basically. But statistically, it's not what it was 4 years ago. The bacteria hasn't changed. The incidents are just much, much more infrequent, and there are reasons for that. And I had a couple slides on too. I'll try and just talk through them by memory. One, genetics. I think we have bees that can handle this a lot more than what they used to. Marla Spivak is famous for her Minnesota hygienics. Nowadays, we think of bees in terms of winter survivability, bromites, things like that. But she bred those bees largely due to their resistance against American Foulbrood because of the threat that it was at the time. So we have better bee genetics to a certain extent, and we have decades now of antibiotic use. So we've got a few different registered treatments for this. Now the FDA and knowledge they haven't discontinued the drugs. What they've done is they've prohibited beekeeper access to them largely. So for decades, termine, which is cycling, we Tylen, tylosin tartrate, and registered for use in honeybee colonies. We could feed them in a variety of methods. Most people mix them with powdered sugar, couple 3 treatments spring, couple more 3 treatments in fall. You're covered for the year, that kind of thing. And beekeepers were largely in the habit of doing that. It was effective, right? We did see some, even here in Iowa, some resistance. If you had that, in theory, popping up, you would just want to shift your management to tylosin tartrate. So we had a lot of beekeepers that switched over to Tylen, and we're just using that prophylactically. We're not allowed to use those things prophylactically anymore, only for cleanup and treatment of a disease. They don't hurt the spores, right? They don't affect the spores at all. So what they do, if you use those chemicals, antimicrobials, in your hives treating away a Foulbrood problem, you still have that scale, you still have those spores in your colony. And once that protection of the drug wears off, the spores are still active and you'll get an active infection again. So you aren't really treating it away. And in pretty much all 50 states, that's not something that we do. So most states have a regulatory component to American Foulbrood. It's one of the main reasons why our inspection programs exist. we look for American Foulbrood visible signs, right? You can do lab tests now. There's a dipstick kind of ELISA type test, like a COVID type test, where you can probably Man Lake as well, and even do a self test. You're not sure. Some beekeepers kind of in their arsenal of tools. It's largely, I don't think it's all that necessary. There's an old Holst milk test that some people believe in. There seems to be something. Anyway, you can look these things up kind of outside tonight's talk. But there are ways, if you think you have this brood problem and it's meeting those symptoms, a brood breakdown in a stage, sunken cappings, holes chewed in them, a shoddy, spotty brood pattern. If you're seeing those in your hives, you almost don't need a test to verify it. You know pretty much dang well what it is. In Iowa, the word that we use in our state code, my chapter that basically tells me what to do is State Code Chapter 160. The associated rules are administrative 2, and in there it kind of breaks down, you know, what we're looking for in our inspections, and then what we do if we find it. And the word that's associated largely with American Foulbrood is eradicate, right? We want to destroy that thing. So we aren't treating the appearance of the disease away with antibiotics and then having it come back later. We're getting rid of those infected combs. If it's a weak colony, if it's late in the season, what we'll need to do is destroy likely the bees and definitely the combs, food resources, that sort of stuff that are in the hive. That's how you get rid of it. In the case of, you know, this year, we had an example where it was earlier in the season. The colonies were pretty strong and the infection was just getting started from used combs that had been inserted in. And we had an example of a time where you could clean that up. And so I'm more than willing to work with beekeepers to try and save as much equipment as possible. And I can let Jenna talk more about that. But you can clean it up by getting rid of absolutely every single comb that may be infected. Right? All brood combs, all combs contain spores in honeycombs. And if you do that, then you're getting rid, the food might be infected with spores just mixed in to the honey. Bob Cox did a honey samples from all over the state, and he found Foulbrood spores back in the day. This was in the 80s or maybe early 90s. And he found spores in just about every honey sample that he had out there. That does not mean that there were active cases of American Foulbrood just across the state. These were probably, in all likelihood, perfectly fine, healthy looking, by all appearances, productive, strong colonies of honeybees, or else there wouldn't be honey being sold in stores from these hives. This showed the prevalence, especially back in the day, more than now. So we want to get rid of the honey, any combs that have scale, probably any brood combs in the hive. What basically then you have is you've created kind of a shaken swarm of these bees on foundation frames. What I like to recommend is giving them one comb, a known clean comb, right? Not a comb out of that infected hive, but a known clean one, maybe from a super. They can empty their honey guts into that comb overnight, meaning that even in their guts, they're not containing any Foulbrood spores. Empty that in there. You come back as the beekeeper the next morning, pull that comb out too, replace it with foundation. Now you've got a pretty clean, then you treat it. A full, typically 3 rounds of antibiotics, usually Tylosin is what I would recommend in this case, and feed them and get them good and heavy and ready for winter, basically, is your next thing. So you've saved the bees, you've saved your woodenware likely, you've gotten rid of your infected combs, and now your job basically probably is you've sacrificed your honey crop for the year, and now you're kind of building up kind of from sort of like a package or shaken swarm situation, and it basically is just all about getting the bees ready for winter. And you can roll that way, right? What a lot of people like to do, nip it in the bud, right? Light it on or equipment, take it to a landfill. It's buried underground. It's eradicated, right? No bees are ever going to come in contact with those combs again. That sort of thing is the most common situation. Because then you can go to sleep that night and you know you don't have American Foulbrood anymore. But absolutely, early enough in the season for the bees to rebound and recover, a strong enough hive that it's worth doing, and reasonably decent shape equipment that's worth saving, oftentimes we actually can these days save the colony using that method and the related antibiotics and get yourself back on your feet without having to destroy the bees. And that's American Foulbrood in a nutshell. So used to be quite common. Now it's far, far, far down the list of maladies that beekeepers worry about. The only problem with it is that it can be so devastating to the beekeeper if it does pop up in your apiary. Hopefully you'll never see it. If you do, YouTube is your friend. Google, maybe come back to this slideshow and look at those photos. There are plenty of examples of what it looks like out there, and it's pretty unique looking. So that's about what I had to say on there. I also wanted to give my number.
You're talking. Maybe.
Okay, I'll try that.
And I can do that too. So the question was if you wanted to go the treatment route rather than eradicating fire, how would you get treatment? Would you need to see a veterinarian?
I don't know.
You do. You have to see a vet. But ironically, you have to see a large animal vet.
Yeah, so the way
because
that
of their licensing, it's
okay.
like a level 2 vet or something.
Andy, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add about
so the
vets?
FDA, most of the things that we use for beekeeping issues. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I muted for some reason?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. So most of the things that we use for beekeeping in terms of drugs and treatments are related to varroa mites and their related viruses, right? And that stuff is controlled right now anyway by the EPA, and you don't need a vet for those things, right? So that's what we're used to. The antibiotics or antimicrobials that we use for American Foulbrood used to be available over the counter until several years ago, right?
Yeah,
You could
but
just
they're
go to
not
Tractor
anymore.
Supply Co. or Fleet Farm or wherever and buy a pouch and bring it home that day and treat, right? Nowadays, that's not the case. The FDA changed the rules on this several years ago, right? Time flies. And now you do, like Jenna said, have to go to a vet. You don't, you don't have the access to it that we used to have. There are plenty of reasons why, antibiotics get overused. I think a lot of times there are issues with antibiotics making it into the foods that we eat and into, ourselves, that kind of thing. In this case, if they're being used properly, of course, you're treating the bees, not the honey, right? And you're treating at a time of year where there are no honey supers on. So there should be no immediate, if they're used properly, no pathway for the antibiotic to get into the honey supers. But we have to play by the same rules as everybody else. So you go through a vet. Sometimes they'll want to inspect, which is kind of funny because oftentimes it's record keeping. They have to cover their own bases rather than probably know what they're looking at necessarily. They come out. I've had this happen. Come out, basically say, "Yes, I see that you've got bees. Here you go," and they'll write you what's called a VFD, a veterinary feed instructions for use, and it allows you either to purchase from them or elsewhere the terramycin, whatever product you need to treat this. And so there's that extra step, extra expense, and extra waiting time now involved in getting your hands on it, like Jenna said.
Okay, and so there's another question. Well, there's a couple other questions. One is about the reporting. Do you report to the USDA and is it public information? Is it anonymized?
Do I report information? Is that what you were asking?
Yes. So like I would come to you,
Well,
you positively
inspection.
identified it, and then what happens with that information?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So that I keep inspection records for everything that throughout the year. That's just those records don't really necessarily get technically. That's public information. Someone FOIA'd or something like that. I suppose they would have access to it, but there isn't any higher level reporting. I don't have to report it to anyone else in the state or up to the feds or anything like that. Um, it would just be the fact that a record of any and every bee inspection that I do technically exists, in a database. So, if you're very concerned about privacy, I suppose that could be an issue. But it's not being shared with anybody else that's going to look into it or follow up on it necessarily. So I suppose that's the answer to the question. When people say a reportable disease, that can mean very regulatory. I mean, that's a regulatory. Our rules are such that it can't be moved and it can't be sold, and you can't even maintain it really in your own apiary. It must be destroyed. It must be eradicated. And that really is where the ball stops.
Okay. And then I don't know if you have your chat box open, Andy. So I just want to make sure you could affirm everything that's in there between
I
Kristen
don't.
and
I'm going to
Jenna.
see if I can figure out how to do it.
Okay, I can read it out loud. So Kristen, it says
Oh, here we go.
Oh, you got it? Yep. So just to make sure I
Let me see.
understand that the only way a hive could get AFB would be if it was introduced by a beekeeper to the hive, or Jenna said, or your bees rob a hive that's been contaminated. Is there any other way to get AFB?
It exists in the environment. Technically, I believe you can find it if you do soil samples even sometimes. But in the real world, the times that we see it, most commonly it's coming from used equipment. It's coming from people buying used combs, especially those that have age to them, sitting around somewhere with an unknown history. You can buy it in nukes. One time, a beekeeper over in Newton area, this is years and years ago, imported a nuke through the mail. No inspection. It came in from California. That thing was just completely overrun with AFB, just scales on all 5 combs in that nuke when he first received it. There was one example years ago, again, where it was a new beekeeper that started from packaged bees on foundation. And by the end of her first year, she had one of her 2 hives that was infested infected with American Foulbrood. And I don't know where that came from, right? Maybe there was a tree or a hollow wall of an old farmhouse or something like that, and her bees robbed that out, or a neighboring beekeeper with old equipment that was sick. I don't know where that came from, but I've been doing this for 18 years. As state apiarist, had bees for years back too. But in my job, as I go around the state, that's the only incident that I can think of where it just organically showed up from nowhere, right? Without like, oops, I bought this equipment and it must have been in the combs, or it came in the nuke that I purchased, or the hive that I purchased from another beekeeper. Usually there's almost like a traceable source that it came from. I can think of only that one time where it was truly a mystery. Where did this infection pop up from? Oftentimes, as that comment says there, dirty hive tool, contaminated wax, that kind of thing, we are what spreads it around our own apiary, right? If you've got it in one hive, it can be on your hands, on your gloves, on your hive tool. So, proper care and hand washing and toothbrushing and that kind of thing, it just comes into this, right? We want to be careful not to be the way that it's moving throughout our bee yard like wildfire. And so you can sanitize with heat your hive tool. You can wash your gloves, or a lot of people are wearing like nitrile gloves and just disposing them if you wear gloves at all. Of course, I keep a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and I've been using soapy water for my mite counts anyway. So I've got soapy water and rubbing alcohol that I always keep in my truck. Anytime I visit a beekeeper, I have like a Bernzomatic blowtorch, and I heat everything up. You want to just heat your things up very, very hot so that you're killing any foulbrood spores that might be, say, on your hive tool, that kind of thing. Now, am I in the habit really of doing that as I go from hive to hive to hive in my own bee yard? Um, no, right? If you had to change your gloves and clean your hive tool between every box that you put on or every hive that you look at, you'd probably go nuts. So, we live in the real world and we have to deal with that. But, I think just awareness that if a hive doesn't look right or the equipment's from an unknown source and you don't know how to identify AFB, be very careful about moving that stuff around and distributing those combs through your apiary because statistically, that's how it pops up.
Okay, I'm not sure if I feel better or if I feel worse now. But
Feel
okay, let's
better.
go.
It's rare. There's another comment on here about contaminated honey, and that's a reality too. And I think most beekeepers are kind of told when you start, like, don't feed someone else's honey to your bees, don't buy honey and feed it to your bees. And this is why, especially back in the day, but still today, you're taking a chance because these spores are microscopic. There's no reasonable way to know what you're inoculating basically into your hive. So, we don't want to feed honey from other beekeepers and from unknown sources. Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out, Jenna.
Yeah, so how about we move over to Jenna? And if you guys have more questions, definitely put them in the chat. So Andy, I appreciate the talk. Will we be able to get
Yeah.
a copy of your slides maybe sent out to everybody? Would that work?
Yeah, I'll send them to you tonight. That'll work fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't know why it's not working. Yeah.
Yeah, mystery, but that's okay. We
All
made it through.
sounds good.
Um,
All
how
right.
about Jenna, why don't you tell us like your name, when you started beekeeping, maybe where how many hives you have and their location? Maybe that would be a
Mm.
good place to start.
Jenna, I started beekeeping. I think this is my 5th year, so I'm still kind of a noob. I'm more of a, I guess until really this, like last year, I'm more of a bee haver than a beekeeper. Definitely a hobbyist. And
Hmm.
I learned throughout the years, obviously, probably most of us know. Do I sound like a robot? Is my voice choppy?
No, your sound's coming through just fine.
Okay. So basically, I learned that obviously it takes the bees a lot longer to create wax than it does to create honey. So I thought I would be slick this year for the first time in my beekeeping career and purchase some pre-drawn honeycomb for my bees so that they wouldn't have to work so hard to make honey. Because I've had bees for 5 years, and this is the first year I've ever collected honey from them. Before this, I would just like open the hives up, watch them work, sit in front of the hives with a book and just like watch them fly in and out. And I don't know, it's like people talk about meditating, and that's kind of what it is for me.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess I made a bad decision in purchasing equipment without having it inspected, and that was a mistake that I will never make again. And I placed the combs that I bought. The issue is that it's not just in the honey, it's in the wax because wax is malleable and it's permeable. So these spores can get inside the wax and they do. Even if there's no honey in the comb that you buy, which there wasn't in the comb that I bought, like the wax was permeated with the disease. And like Andy said, in like it eats, it's like a fungal disease that like eats the babies, right? So
The
in one little
bacteria. Yeah.
yeah, so like in one little cell, there's like millions and millions of spores, and that permeates into the wall of the wax. So, like Andy said, you just don't know until I didn't know until the bees started laying inside the brood wax that I gave them. And it was a very intense process to get rid of it. It was very emotional for me. I mean, 6 or 7 hives, I think, is what I was at, which is the most I've ever been at. And I was trying to expand and I was very excited. And I put my bees in a very dangerous situation. And I felt um, obligated to try to do what was right instead of just kill them because it's not their fault that I gave them contaminated wax. So, in most places, Um, in most places, they require you to burn the hives. You light them on fire, you bury them, and you call it a day, and you just take the loss. But because I caught it so early, like I'm in my hives a lot and I knew that something was weird. And I think I'm gonna try to share my screen. So the main thing that I noticed when I was looking in the hive, when I was looking at my brood, I noticed that the caps were sunk. So it kind of looks like the edges of the hexagon look perforated almost. Um, so let me just, can you see my screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so
Looks
this is what I was looking at, where like if you look at the edges of this, can you see my little doodad moving around?
yeah, I can see your cursor.
Okay, so like this is what tipped me off, right?
You want to zoom in a little more?
Did that work?
Yep. Yep. Perfect.
Okay. So like the edges of the hexagons are perforated and the caps are sunk. And then you see stuff like this where it's like the baby's just melted into the bottom and you can kind of see that scaling he was talking about a little bit down in there. You see that? Where it's like a ring kind of down in the bottom almost. So that was my biggest tip off. And like I said, I've had bees for 5 years. Next year will be my oh my gosh.
So did you have a smell?
Yes, there was a bit of a weird smell. It was just kind of musty to me. Like, so I don't know, and I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure what. So I actually didn't know that state inspections are free. I had no idea. I think we need to spread awareness about that because I think the reason some people don't call inspectors is because they think it's going to be like a pain in the butt to get somebody out there to look at your hives, or they think it's going to cost some amount of money. And Andy's pretty good about like getting out to you and, doing a good job just getting to your place and really checking things out. And he's very laid back. He's very nice to work with, which helps a lot. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I've
he just came
definitely
out.
had people ask me like, how much is it? So you're
Yeah,
right. It's
like
not
it
a
costs
well-known
nothing.
fact that it's
Like,
free.
yeah, all it costs is your time to set it up. And it's actually something else I didn't know before this is that it's actually illegal to sell and purchase uninspected equipment. So if someone is trying to sell you uninspected equipment and you ask them to get it inspected and they give you a hard time, it's not, I mean, you can hit them with it's illegal if you want to. You can say, hey man, just trying to follow the rules here. I don't know if you know, but it's actually illegal. And stuff like this is why, because someone like me will just unwittingly purchase what we think is decent equipment and accidentally poison my hives with it. So I had to go through a process, like a very intensive process of uh, basically like, so here's what happened. So I knew something was wrong. I called the estate inspector, that's Andy. He showed up, he looked through my hives, and he was like, yeah, you've got AFB. Essentially, your options are to try to cure them or light the hives on fire. So I went the route because I like to do things the hard way. I decided to try to cure my bees, which was expensive and very hard and very stressful. So if you ever run into that, I can definitely see why some people just opt to light their hives on fire at this point. I get it. Um,
Was
so I'm
there a
just going,
time pressure, like a time frame when you had to get
yes,
things? Okay.
yes, because you can't, I mean, you can't have a disease like that in your hive, in my opinion, like having a disease in my hive and knowing that the local population is going to be subjected to it, knowing that people like other bees could rob my hives, knowing that like I could infect other yards, like he basically gave me 2 weeks to get it squared away. He was like, you have 2 weeks to get your stuff together, to get it figured out, and that's just him following the rules on his end. So I had
Well,
to
and that's
contact,
also you being really responsible,
yeah.
worrying about
So,
bees that aren't even yours, you know.
yep. So
Mm.
from that point, I also do I do hive removal from homes. I'm a carpenter and I do bee removal from people's houses. So I essentially had to stop my side business. I had to quarantine my hives. I had to Had to, because it's the route I chose, because I could have just lit all my equipment on fire and just called it a bad year. Um, so that is an option. And honestly, it's the easier option. I hate to say it's the less stressful option, but after I went through what I did, I would say it is definitely the less stressful option. Um, so essentially, because the wax is permeable and because the bees they can carry the bacteria in their honey gut, I had to remove one by one every single hive that I have. I had to remove all the bees, torch the inside of the boxes, because the only thing that will kill the bacterial spores is heat above 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So I had to get a MAP torch, like a welding torch, and torch the inside of my boxes, burn off all the propolis, burn off all the wax, and then I had to shake the bees into new frames that I put together and I gave them one frame of drawn comb that actually I got from Julie. So thanks for that, Julie. So yeah, I had to give them a frame of drawn comb. I had to wait 24 hours to let them empty their guts into it, because their instinct is going to be to try to fill up that empty comb so that they have somewhere to like store their food, because at that point their brain goes into like, okay, we're starving, store the food. And then you remove the comb, burn that comb along with all of the other combs that you have to burn, because you can't keep anything at that point. Any wax that you have inside any hive that could potentially be infected is smoked. So you have to burn it. You got to burn it all. You have to burn everything but every frame you have to physically like burn. So here, let me show you a picture. I don't know. I'll just like, can you see my screen?
Yeah. Yeah. We can see
Okay,
it.
so I torched everything, right? So this is what I did. I went through, I torched all my equipment. That's me with gloves on. I wore disposable gloves. Because if you get the spores on your hands, like Andy was talking about, if you get the spores on your hands, you can reinfect other hives. So I went through with a torch. I went hive by hive. I would torch all the equipment, shake the bees into that box with their one frame that I gave them and the new frames I gave them, right? So I put new frames together, basically completely started from scratch, nothing drawn. And I put them in nukes, some of them, because at that point, they like, oh, wouldn't fit. So yeah, then I lit all of the frames on fire. Like you can see the brood in there. Can you see that?
Yeah, it's a little painful to look at.
Yeah, it was like I said, dude, it was a very it was
Is
one of the worst it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had beekeeping, like hands down. I mean, so I don't know. I think the biggest thing is just that everybody is responsible with I don't know, just be responsible, get your stuff inspected and get it inspected a couple times a year. It's a free service. But all it takes is sending a text, and Andy kind of takes care of the rest just as far as lining it up. You don't even have to be there. He'll come look at your stuff even if you're not home. So I don't know. It's just a matter of like, being good stewards of our bees, and like it's a mistake that I definitely won't make again. Um
Well, tell
and
us
I
what
had
happened after you burned the combs. What was the next step you
So I
took?
burned the combs. I put all those new frames in there. I put the one frame in with the drawn wax. I let them puke their honey guts into it, cold it, and then I gave them just new comb, or
Bear Foundation.
the bare foundation, yes. But unfortunately, I don't know if you guys know or have noticed, but we had a pretty rough late summer, kind of early fall. It was kind of a dearth. I mean, the bees did not, I think it was because of all the rain. It went from like being super rainy to being super like hot. It's like 90 degrees, it went from raining for 2 months straight to being 90 degrees for 2 months straight. And a lot of plants did not like that. So we ended up with a really, really bad summer honey flow and nectar flow, and the bees really suffered. And even the hives that I saved, I ended up having to combine a couple of them because they were starving. They just didn't have enough resources from the natural world to rebuild themselves. So even after all of that, oh, and not to mention, having to go through the process of finding a large animal vet and having them come out and giving them the $200 just to write you a prescription. When they come out there and it's like they look at cows and pigs and horses all day, they don't know what the hell they're looking at when they're looking at bees, you know, but they have to come out. And that's just how you have to do it. It's just a red tape, total baloney, but it is what it is if you want to figure it out. So call your inspector, get the large animal vet out there, have them take a look, go, yes, that definitely looks like what you say it is. And then have them write you the prescription for the antibiotics you need. And then, I had to treat them. Oh, so then you have to shake all the bees out, burn all the equipment, scorch all the equipment. And then I had to feed them. Oh, and at this point, it's like you're quarantining your entire apiary. It doesn't, if you sell honey, you don't get to sell honey. If you sell wax, you don't get to sell wax. Like you are at a standstill until it's fixed, which you won't be able to tell until usually 1 or 2 months, because that's how long it takes for the bacteria to like develop and show up inside the hive. So yeah, it was a totally lame, really stressful experience. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. Yeah. It sucked, dude. It sucked.
So, okay, so you had Andy, you had a large animal vet, you had fresh comb. Um, did you used your own bees? Did you need to get new queens?
No, you don't have to requeen. And
No? Okay.
actually, I was surprised you don't have to requeen your hives, because the queens don't feed the brood. So even if your queen bee has some of the bacteria in her gut, it won't last for long just because of how fast she digests it. But also the queen does not feed the brood. So even if the queen did have the bacteria, you don't it's not even necessarily a concern because she's not the one taking care of the brood. It's mostly the nurse bees refeeding the brood that bacteria that's the main concern.
Sure. So what would be like your best tip or your best encouragement um if someone thinks they've got Foulbrood?
You have to tell someone. You can't, it might cross your mind to just not say anything. Don't do that. Don't do that. Tell someone, get some help. The faster you catch it, just be active in your hives. That's like preventative for anything, right? Just be active, be in there, be looking, be alert, like pay attention, write yourself notes so that you know what's going on at all times, and just be proactive, make sure that because if you catch it early, you can solve it. It's a solvable problem. But if you catch it too late, you're effed basically. You can't, there's no fixing it.
Right. So do you feel like, so you said you had combined a couple hives. Do you feel like you're set for winter in 2026?
I hope so, but I don't know. Like winters here are weird. Sometimes several hives overwinter. Sometimes I get 6 out of 6 hives overwintering, and sometimes I come out of winter with like no hives because they all die. I'm still trying to kind of figure that out. For me, I don't know about anyone else here, but for me, I have figured out that feeding protein in the springtime really helps my bees, especially just because we get that weird weather where it's like really hot and really cold and really hot and really cold, and the bees will like eat all the nutrients and resources. So I don't know. For me, it's like if I feed protein in the springtime, it seems like I have better results with them coming out of winter, but I'm no expert. That's just my personal experience. But as far as just any diseases, like preventing any disease, it really just is preventative. It's knowing your bees, it's being active inside the hives and watching and listening. And the only reason that I knew that something was wrong because I was in there enough to know that it wasn't the same as what it should be. And even then I didn't know what it was. So just be watchful, be wary. Don't ever buy uninspected equipment, and do not sell uninspected swarms, don't sell uninspected nukes. Just it is free. It's a phone call. It just takes a little patience. So
Yeah,
that's all.
Andy, do you maybe want to drop your work number in the chat for everyone? And then does anyone have a question for Jenna? We're at 8:01 p.m., so
Yeah.
about an
It's about
hour.
time to blow this popsicle stand.
Are there any other photos you want to share with us?
I mean, I don't think so. I just really wanted to share. I think the only other thing I would say is when I was burning all of the frames
I
of
would just
honey
like to
and
say
stuff.
to Jenna, yeah, thanks for this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you got to be pretty brave to come and do this. You want to repeat that, Andy?
Yeah, I wanted to tell Jenna thanks for the sales pitch for the inspection.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And again, she kind of mentioned this, but I think it might have got lost. It's like she knew that something serious was wrong. Maybe Jenna didn't know what it was, but she was seeing the issue in her bees. And that's where I think a lot of beekeepers are. You're in your bees enough, you're identifying what looks good, and then when something doesn't look right, that should throw up red flags. And it did with Jenna. And that's when she had me come by. And then unfortunately, it was this, statistically pretty rare thing that she inherited with the combs that she had, of course. But um, that's the thing, right? You can't be expected to recognize something that you've never seen before. But hopefully, all beekeepers with a year of experience or more have been in their bees enough that they know what a good pattern is. They know what good open brood looks like, white and swollen and juicy and wet and kind of pearlescent, in there. You want to see the very young larvae being well fed, kind of swimming in jelly. And then the cat brood should be relatively solid, a few holes are okay here and there, but you want to see a pretty good pattern. And when you see weird ages, eggs next to cap, next to mid-stage brood, that spotty and shoddy kind of appearance. And when you see cappings that are sunken in and perforated holes and especially the scale, get out a twig, bend down and find a dry stick and stick it into some of those that have holes in them and just slow it down around in there, stick a little bit and see if there's a mucusy. Definitely saw in Jenna's. That's pretty. Double check or get the inspection service involved or whatever, because you just don't want it to be something that's persistent through your apiary, kind of through time. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So I
you don't want
appreciate
to
all the
be.
cooperation this season, Jenna. And you
Yeah,
don't have to stop selling wax and honey. Just don't sell it for bee use. Yeah.
yeah, no, I
Yeah.
just wouldn't. I mean, the only honey, so I make mead, and the only way I was comfortable using the honey that I use was to make mead with it because I know that bees likely are not going to consume that honey. And I know that even if I heat up the honey for mead, it's not going to ruin the quality of the mead. And the other thing was like with the wax, I'm already heating it to a certain temperature. It's not quite 250 degrees, but I think it's also possible to be like, I'm only selling this wax for products, body products, for candle products. So I don't know. Maybe that's just me being paranoid, but I don't ever want to be the reason it ever happens to anyone else. So
No, I think that's wonderful to hear how much responsibility you feel. And I think everybody who's a beekeeper generally is pretty responsible. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If anyone wants to turn their camera on and just ask Andy or Jenna a question, this would be a good time to do it.
I feel done talking if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you can go ahead. If you want to mute and turn your video off, that's fine.
Yeah, I think I'll
Um,
mute.
um, I'm wondering, perfect. So Andy's got his info in the chat there. If there's anything that you think you'll do differently with your inspections after tonight's session, it would be interesting to see you share that with us in the chat. Um, I will get the slides from Andy shared. And then um, I guess just to close up, I guess it sounds like AFB is pretty rare, and awareness and support would you'll be the best protection is what I think I'm taking away from that. So I want to say thank you to Jenna and thank you to Andy for sharing your experience and your expertise.
Yeah, thanks,
Um,
Andy.